So how significant is the bill and what kind of challenge does it represent?
I think it's the most serious challenge to the autonomy of Hong Kong and to the rule of law in Hong Kong since we left in 1997. And it flatly goes against all the promises that were made about guaranteeing Hong Kong's local autonomy. It gets rid of a firewall between the rule of law in Hong Kong, which is so crucial to Hong Kong's success and stability, and the idea of law of the Communist Party in China, in which there aren't independent courts, in which the security services and whatever the party decides is what counts as far as the law is concerned. So it's not surprising that maybe up to 1 million people were demonstrating today. When we were in charge, I cannot remember in the 5 years I was there an occasion when there were more than a few hundred people. The biggest demonstrations in those days were about Tiananmen Square.
So you would agree that this is the biggest crisis since 1997 that Hong Kong's faced?
I think it is. People will of course remember the demonstrations about democracy in 2014, which were important, but this goes right to the heart of what has made Hong Kong so successful, which is why 1,000 lawyers the other day were demonstrating, which is why the business community has made a fuss, which is why international chambers of commerce have been up in arms, which is why the community as a whole is so disturbed and upset about it.
Why does this bill pose such a threat to Hong Kong?
Because what it does very clearly is to get rid of the wall that was created between the law in Hong Kong and what passes for the law in China. The Chinese government promised that Hong Kong's autonomy, the rule of law in Hong Kong, would survive for 50 years after 1997. If you can't trust the Chinese government on Hong Kong, what can you trust them about? They've broken their word on this, and I don't think anybody in Hong Kong, or hardly anybody in Hong Kong, trusts them. I don't think the government have made this decision in Hong Kong. I think it's been made in Beijing, and the government in Hong Kong just does what it's told.
So what does that mean for the rule of law?
Well, I hope that individual judges will continue to apply the law as judiciously, to use an obvious word, as possible. But what it does is to make it impossible to distinguish between the way we approach the law with independent courts, with the rule of law, and what the Chinese talk about, which is rule by law, which means rule in whatever way the party actually thinks is sensible. The government said this was necessary to close up a loophole. That is complete drivel. Everybody has said that the particular case which is referred to involving Taiwan could have been dealt with in other ways. The 12 recent chairmen of the Bar Association have pointed out how you could have dealt with it based on the common law. We made it absolutely clear when we were in charge. Malcolm Rifkin said this the other day, who was Foreign Secretary at the time, that we weren't going to do an extradition agreement between Hong Kong, Britain and China because of the concerns that everybody had about Hong Kong's difference from what was happening in China. Once you get rid of that, it creates real uncertainties and worries. And let me tell you one really important business point which has to be made. If you start treating Hong Kong as though it was just the same as Shenzhen in China or in other Chinese cities, then the international business community are going to be very reluctant to treat Hong Kong as though it's different from China when it comes to making investments, when it comes to doing trade deals. And that's something that's already been said in Congress, which is worrying. When I was governor of Hong Kong, I went again and again to Washington to argue the case for Hong Kong being treated differently from the rest of China. If you treat Hong Kong exactly the same as the rest of China, then it has very worrying implications for Hong Kong business.
And is it just business that the damage of Hong Kong's reputation will be too?
Well, it does represent a real threat to Hong Kong's reputation as a great international hub, which it's always been. But it's also, I think, important to see it in terms of the way it's unnerved ordinary citizens, men, women, families in Hong Kong, which is why so many people have started to talk about the possibility of emigration. Hong Kong is a very special place. It's, of course, part of China, but it's a place with its own sense of citizenship, and it's different from China Deng Xiaoping's concept of one country, two systems was a brilliant way of handling the handover of Hong Kong to China. But what's happened with this president, who's taken dictatorial powers, is that he's rolled back many of the changes made by Deng Xiaoping, and this is yet another of them. I very much hope the British government will say that more forcefully, as other governments have been doing as well. This isn't just Britain, it's the international community. And the really important point that we should make to China over and over again is China has a very important part to play in the world in the 21st century. In order to play that role, we have to be able to trust China. And if you can't trust China to keep its word on Hong Kong, where can you trust China to keep its word?